WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. I've got a new script somewhere for all the things that I need to say and talk about in football season. And our crab cake tour presented by the Maryland Lottery, we're getting that back out at Union Brewing beginning next Friday. And it is football season, so a happy football season. Welcome Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson into another NFL season. But we got baseball going on around here. Luke joins us right now. A week of great hope, right? Certainly a month of great promise for the Orioles to have put themselves in a position here where I think it'll be pretty disappointing if this thing peters out and they play like they did on Monday. But nonetheless, 10 opportunities against the Toronto Blue Jays, a little 1989 throwback for the old guys like myself. And Luke, I say, why not? And you may say, because they got swept in a doubleheader earlier in the week, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was saying to you before we began our conversation, I mean, quite a shift in mojo from about, what was it, 10 o'clock on Saturday night, where they moved to a season high 10 games above 500, having beaten Oakland again, and then a pretty listless performance on Sunday. And then the Labor Day doubleheader. I mean, it wasn't quite Pete Harnish stepping on a nail up in Toronto and Dave Johnson making the spot start at Skydome, but Jordan Lyles, who's taken the ball for the Orioles all year long and hasn't always been the prettiest performance statistically, but has given them a chance to win, has given them innings, for a bullpen that has worked a ton. He's taken the ball every fifth day. He's under the weather and he can't go in game one. Mike Ballman makes a spot start coming up from AAA Norfolk, which, hey, that's part of the territory of having a doubleheader, right? Usually you're going to do something along those lines, but Lyles starts to warm up for game two and he can't go. and that's when the Orioles are in trouble. And you just look at what happened over roughly a 30, 31, 32-hour period to go from 10 games above 500 to losing three in a row. And they go from 1.5 games back of Toronto to 4.5 back. It's not over. Let's be very clear about that because of what you just mentioned. They still have games against Toronto, not just the remainder of this series, but later on this month. But I think the big takeaway, and I would have said this to you even Saturday night as the Orioles were coming off their 4th straight win, is Tampa Bay and Seattle and Toronto keep winning. And you look at this thing now as we're on the other side of Labor Day, they're all teams that are on a pace to win 90-plus games. A couple weeks ago when we talked about this, we thought, okay, maybe the third wild card, 86, 87 wins, maybe 88. That standard seems like it's getting tougher here down the stretch. And, we can sit here and say, well, the Orioles have this fatal flaw or this happened or that happened. You just kind of look at it and say, how much more can you really ask out of a team that lost 110 games last year? I mean, they have overachieved to such a dramatic degree, and there's so much to be excited about. And we'll get into Gunnar Henderson, we'll get into some of these other young guys, but
the pennant race sits on top of all of it, and it gets heavy. It gets heavy.
It does.
When you get swept on, in front of your fans at home, honestly, it's the first time they've been kicked in the teeth since they've been considered credible. Right? It's what they've been sneaking up. Now they're not sneaking up anymore. Now it's pay for play, and you're going to get your feelings hurt once. If you're not good enough, you're going to get your feelings hurt. And this would be true if they got into the playoffs and got their ass kicked in three days, but like they did against the Royals, back in 2014, right? Like that was one that sort of got away and it felt like you had a chance. You always feel like you have a chance till you run into a bigger, better team. And as constructed, to your point, they're going to run into teams that are better than them. As players, as a lineup, as a pitching staff, as a pitching, as 12, 13 guys pitching, they're not as good as the Yankees. They're not as good as the Astros. They weren't meant to be. And the fact that we started thinking about them in that light, the reality comes in this month where they have to win these games, especially have to win these Toronto. I mean, if they go a few more deep into Toronto, they got them again next week and again at the end. These are the games they have to hold their water, and they didn't hold their water on Monday, right?
Yeah, and that's just. You look at it, we can talk about the offense, certainly. Last game of the Oakland series, and you look at these two games.
Great unis, by the way.
Yeah, no question. That's Saturday night. Orioles orange against the Oakland Kelly green. That was
I'm only
a
bringing it up because
uniform
it's a holiday
dream.
weekend, and you know how good they did look.
Yeah.
So you know.
Yeah, no question. But I mean, you look at these games, and certainly they didn't pitch well on Monday either. When you're considering some of the arms they're having to throw out there, given some of the circumstances of doubleheader, and then your top guy in terms of just being your workhorse can't go because he's under the weather and sweating bullets trying to warm up before game two. So they didn't pitch well either. Let's be clear, but. You just look at them offensively, and we've been talking about this for a few weeks now. It's been such a feast or famine and been a little too much famine, despite the fact that they've still found ways to win some of these games. But Monday was a great lesson, Nestor, of this is the other side of being being in the midst of playing meaningful baseball. It hurts a little more. I mean, last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, what did they do Labor Day weekend? I don't know, because no one remembers it because it didn't matter, right? I mean, so you look at this, and it is a reminder of just it's exciting, it's a lot of fun, but it can be painful too when you have a stretch like this. I mean, let's face it, they lost 3 in a row. That's not something that is that extraordinarily terrible. I mean, every team in baseball is going to go through stretches like that, but the timing of it is just tough. And to your point, you made mention of this a couple moments ago. It's the first time they've even lost as many as 3 in a row since the end of June, early July, when they went to Minnesota and Jorge Lopez gave up a couple walk-offs in a row. I mean, that's how long it's been. And then they had the long winning streak right after that. So, that last point I just mentioned, maybe that's the silver lining here and saying, hey, this team going back to May, they've had some rough patches here and there, but they've always bounced back, and then they start playing really good baseball again. They need to do that again this time because that's just the truth when you're talking about finishing Labor Day and you're 4.5 back. Still games against Toronto to make that up, but boy, your margin for error is getting smaller and smaller. And again, it just speaks to how tough this is. It's fun and it's great, and it's great experience for these young guys, and you still have so much optimism for the future. Nothing changes
keep winning
in that regard. But right. I mean,
winning.
That's the thing. We're not in May now where you lose 3 in a row and you kind of shrug your shoulders and say, well, you still have 4 months of baseball left. Now you're in a position where you have 4 weeks, 3.5 weeks of baseball left. So, it just makes things that much more difficult in the short term. But hey, I will say this much. This team, to the point I just made, they've bounced back on a number of occasions. They've had some rough patches where you start to say, all right, is this other shoe drops? I don't feel that way quite as much. It's just the reality of the math is the math right now. The time is running short, and these games head to head against Toronto are just of the utmost importance because we know, Tampa Bay, Seattle, the Orioles lost the season series. There's no game 163 scenario. So Toronto's your one chance to really make hay from a head to head standpoint and finish above them because, these tiebreakers scenarios aren't going to work out for them otherwise. So they got to bounce back. They need to bounce back quickly. And to their credit, they've done that on a number of occasions this year. But as it gets into September, and you just look at this thing, I mean, just look at Toronto, 5-game winning streak through Labor Day. Seattle, 8 of their last 10 they've won. Tampa Bay has continued to win. That standard's just getting higher and higher. And like I said, a few weeks ago, I would have thought 87, maybe 88 wins might get you the third wild card. Now it's starting to look more and more like might be 90 plus. And how much can you really expect out of this Orioles team? I mean, it's not as though the 89 Orioles won 98 games. Go back and look at what that race looked like. So when you're trying to make comparisons to, other past Cinderella teams for the Orioles, you just start to ask at some point, they just might not be quite good enough at this point. But
well,
we'll
the 89 Orioles were kind of like that. I remember where I was that weekend. I was sitting out at Chi-Chi's with my girlfriend, Wendy. The night of the nail game, I remember everything about that weekend.
Yeah.
They were very much like this team. Like, it was very pinch me. It was very, they're going to fade. They have to fade. They lost 100 games. Like, you remember how bad they were last year? Like, these guys are too young. Craig Worthington's too young. Like, I remember all of that, right? And it doesn't feel dissimilar. What does feel different is that there's more rungs. There's six chances here, right? So you look at it and you say, well, who do they catch? How do they catch them? We were talking about that in June, July, into August. Now that they're in the race, it really has sort of flushed out a little bit, right? I mean, like it really is them in Toronto at this point, when you're talking about the 10 games, anybody coming to catch or chase anybody, I would say they are the chaser. I don't think they're either going to make it or they're not. They're going to be 6 or they're going to be 7, maybe 8.
Yeah, I mean, and I mean, certainly you don't want to discount Minnesota and the White Sox entirely, mainly because that division. I mean, you just look at the AL Central, you've got a couple bottom feeders there that some of these teams that they're facing, a Kansas City or a Detroit, they can get well. The Orioles aren't in that position in the AL East. I mean, okay, you could say it about the Red Sox, but even they've played a little bit better of late. So it's just it's tough sledding in that
Toronto would have
regard.
to do a lot of losing in order to get order to back up at this
point,
right?
I mean, you just look at that, and those teams have just played really well. And hey, let's be clear: the Orioles, until we got to this 30-hour period where they lose 3 games, they were playing really well. I mean, they had won 4 in a row, and we're up to 10 over 500. I mean,
it felt like they couldn't lose when they're out there running around their pajamas on Saturday.
It did. I mean, it was, I mean, especially on the heels of the last road trip where you take 2 out of 3 from Houston, you go to Cleveland, take 2 out of 3 there. Gunnar Henderson comes up, hits a home run. I mean, you've got so many things that you're feeling good about. And look, those things haven't gone away, but Sunday into Monday was a reminder of just how fleeting this can be for any team, not just the Orioles. You have at this point in the season, when you're in a tight, whether it's a divisional race or the wild card race, and it's that tight, you have a bad 2 days, a bad 3 days. That's the difference between your head to head and now you're suddenly really chasing, and that's where the Orioles kind of find themselves. But if you finish off the Toronto series on a high note, take the last 2, get a 4-game split, you're 2.5 back, and then you've got the Red Sox coming to town, and the Orioles have been better than Boston. They've been better than them for a while. So, you've got a chance here to bounce back, but you can't sit here and say, woe is me, and what happened, and Jordan Lyles was sick, and you had to throw some minor league arms we didn't want to throw. I mean, it is what it is. It happened, right? I mean, you're going to go through that. Look at the Yankees over the last 2 months, and the Orioles were 23 games back at one point, and you look at them a couple months later, and if it was a single-digit deficit over the weekend. I mean, it just shows how crazy a season can be. A team that we were talking about as maybe one of the all-time great Yankees teams, in the last 2 months, they've been kind of a disaster. If they didn't have such a big lead, so things can change.
And that won't matter over 3 days next month, right?
Yeah,
right. I mean, how bad they played 6 weeks ago and how they were losing all those games and all that stuff. There are plenty of teams that have done that and overcome that, one World Series. And certainly the Yankees, the Astros will be formidable once you get there, but you got to get there. So getting there right now, 40-man roster, bringing up guys, Bruce Zimmerman running around. What in your mind is the state of the team, and what does Brandon Hyde want to do? Because all of these new young baby birds, you bring them up, you have to play them, but I don't know what you're going to get out of them over the next 3 weeks, or what would get them over the hump. I mean, we're long past talking about if Trey Mancini were here. That feels like last year,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's been well over a month now. I mean, I think, first of all, keep in mind, I mean, 40-man roster, it's only a 28-man roster. I mean, they only get 2 extra spots at this point. So, of course, you have some arms you can draw from. We're going to see the Norfolk shuttle fired up probably a little bit more than we've seen it anyway, because I think Brandon Hyde, just the nature of these games, you do need to go to your bullpen a little more frequently. So,
by the way, can I say something? I don't want to be too interrupted, but I did some traveling this weekend. I got to say this to you, okay? So I went to Canada. We drove into Quebec to see Pearl Jam, and then we drove down to Montreal, which is always the weirdest thing because you see Expo stuff everywhere, right? So there's just Expo stuff, not UP, but Expo stuff, right? So I'm in Montreal. We went the wrong way, and we got stuck in traffic. We wound up going by Olympic Stadium. So I saw it, and there it is, and I never saw a game there. And I said to my wife, man, they still play here once a year. I should come up here and go to a game, just to make sure I do it. And then we drove to Ottawa. And I'm driving into Ottawa, and I'm thinking, the hell do I know about Ottawa? Who do I know in Ottawa? Do I know? Yeah, I got my friend. I call him. And I'm driving through, and then I saw a baseball stadium. And as I got past the baseball stadium, I'm like, oh, my God, this is where Eric Bedard pitched. This is where they all played. And I'm thinking, how the hell did they get from here to Baltimore.
Yeah.
So when you start to say the Norfolk shuttle, and I guess, old Buck came in and Buck said, we ain't going to have our shuttle up in Ottawa. We got to get the boys down here. And so I don't know what played into all that other than probably some crazy thing in the Angelos family that had ever wound up there when Naomi Silver said working with the Orioles after 53 years is nothing I want to do anymore and threw them out years ago. But Ottawa, I went to Ottawa. I saw the ballpark, and all I could think about was, what a terrible, terrible, terrible place to put your affiliate when it wasn't even cold when I was there. It just looked cold. Yeah. And I thought to myself, no bueno. Who would go to a baseball game in Ottawa? And I thought, they did this for a decade. They did it for a long time, right?
I don't know if it was a decade, but it was a while. I mean, it was more than a year or two, right? And
so I just want to say, you're shuttle up, shuttle down, shuttle up. Norfolk, yeah, you can drive it in 4 hours if you had to, right? Ottawa, totally different thing, and I went there. So.
Oh yeah, especially your AAA affiliate. I mean, we're not talking about some single A team where you're not going to be calling anyone up from Ottawa to Baltimore and make it.
There's no flights from Ottawa to Baltimore.
Exactly.
What's wrong with you?
No, but to get back to your kind of state of where the Orioles are right now. I mentioned that. You have the bullpen that, and we talked about this from the time that they traded Jorge Lopez. Felix Bautista has been fantastic. I mean, as much as we've talked about Adley Rutschman and the potential for him to be in that Rookie of the Year conversation, which he is, even having just been called up May 21st, he's in the thick of that. But Felix Bautista deserves consideration as well. And as I said all along, for me, it wasn't about any trepidation of Felix Bautista taking over the quote closer role. It was Felix Bautista was their highest leverage guy. He was the guy that, if you kind of look back at some of those game scenarios, Brandon Hyde, Jorge Lopez, was the ninth inning closer. But the biggest moment of the game, whether it was facing the heart of the order in the seventh inning or the eighth inning, Felix Bautista was the guy for that. So when he replaces Lopez, the question was always going to be who replaces him. And look, Brandon Hyde, just like any other manager, you can nitpick and sometimes more than nitpick. Sometimes it's a legitimate question. Why go to this guy in this spot? You could do that with any manager. And the reality is, and I know this, he hasn't said this, it's not like he's saying this in a pregame press conference, but you just know the reality of it is he's searching for that other guy to be the stud on the back end of the bullpen. And he's got a bunch of middle relievers who have overachieved and done a great job, but that becomes a challenge, especially when you have a starting rotation that's not going deep into games consistently, although they had been of late until the last couple days. So you have that, but by and large, the bullpen's been such a strength. Where I really look at this team right now, and I just keep saying, all right, guys, it's now or never. Just got swept by Toronto on Labor Day. You took 2 out of 3 against Oakland, but you had a chance to sweep on Sunday and you didn't get it. It happens. It's not as though the A's lose every single game when they go out there. But I keep looking at this offense and I keep saying this can be better than what it is. And that's the big thing. If you want to look at the Orioles statistically and kind of figure out, okay, why are they a team that's already won 70 plus games? As we're in the first week of September compared to a team that lost 110 last year and only won 52. The offense has been fairly similar to what last year's looked like. Now, Cedric Mullins had a career year last year. He's been more fine this year. You can kind of go down the list. Mountcastle hasn't been as good as he was last year, but as an entire offense, their runs scored per game is fairly comparable to last year. The big difference has been the bullpen. But and the pitching in general, because the rotation's even been better than you would have expected, given the names that are there and given no John Means, no Grayson Rodriguez being called up, they've overachieved. But I keep looking at this offense and keep saying, when are they going to really get themselves on a roll? And that's not to say they become the best in the league, but they're definitely guys. Ryan Mountcastle until very recently, and hopefully that's a sign of him heating up. Like he hit in June, but did not hit in July and August. Austin Hayes, same thing. We were talking about Austin Hayes back in June. He would have been my vote for most valuable Oriole then, but over the last 2 months, he hasn't been very good. He's been, kind of a 200 hitter at the plate to the point that, and as I wrote about this at BaltimorePositive.com, Brandon Hyde pinch hit for him on Friday night in a key spot because he had Adley Rutschman coming off the bench. And that's something that you would not have expected earlier in the season. So it's not just those two guys. It's up and down the lineup that, you've got some guys that do need to pick it up. I mean, it can't just be Adley Rutschman, who, even he had a little bit of a struggle on the last road trip, the winning aside for the club. So, they need it to be more consistent top to bottom, because at some point you just keep saying, how much more can you really ask out of this pitching staff? And you're waiting for some of these guys to get themselves going again offensively. And, it hasn't really happened. I mean, again, they didn't pitch well Monday. I don't want to sit here and say that the pitching was good enough. They gave up, 8 runs and 7 runs. I mean, that's not good enough. But on the flip side, they scored 3 and they scored 4. 3.5 runs per game. That's not good enough. And that's kind of where they've been a little bit too much, despite the fact that they've still managed to win. They've been in these close games every night, and they're asking so much of their bullpen every night because their offense has been so. It's not terrible, but it hasn't been as good as you'd like it to be, especially considering some of the guys that, well, in the case of Mountcastle, hasn't hit for the better part of the last couple months. Again, a couple home runs here recently. You hope that that's the start of him going on a tear, but him and Austin Hayes and some other guys, and some veterans, Rougned Odor, who continues to play a lot, which is still something that I find to be interesting, but it's been very choppy offensively. And I think that's the thing that I look to more than anything, because, again,
well, you don't feel like they're going to go out and score 6 or 8 runs every night.
And that's,
you don't.
And look, I mean, 6 or 8, I mean, sure, you're not going to score 8 runs, but, I'd like to see this team be able to score 5 runs more consistently. How about that? Because you're just asking so much of this pitching staff, relative to what expectations are. I mean, Felix Bautista is a stud, but you're having to lean on, Baker and Joey Crable, and CNL Perez has been fantastic, but he's still a little more of a lefty specialist. Dylan Tate's
to your point, even a lead 6th, 7th, 8th inning, you got a lot of outs you got to get.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a lot of strain you're putting on your pitching staff. I mean, that was what was so nice about. I mean, you look at the Oakland series where they had a little bit of a little more of a breathing room that you just haven't seen. They especially the Saturday game where they won 8-1. I mean, that's been rare. They haven't had many 7-run victories. It's been a lot of these 1 and 2 and 3 run games. So, and look, that's to be expected because this isn't a powerhouse, right? They've been really good, better than expectations by a long shot, but they're not a team that has a plus 150 run differential. They're playing a lot of close games. So for me, it's not about asking the pitching staff to do even more. For me, it's, you need this offense to get rolling. And that's what's been tough. I mean, generally speaking, even as they've had this prosperity, it's kind of been a couple guys that are carrying them at a time. And that's a really tough way to play. Doesn't mean all 9 guys are going to be raking at the same time, but the offense needs to pick it up. There's no question about that. And what happened on Monday with the Jordan Lyles thing and Bruce Zimmerman coming up from Norfolk and trying to get him ready in time, and having to go to lefties against a right-handed hitting Toronto lineup, that was less than ideal. But if you want to get yourself back on track, not just for the series, but the rest of the way, and keep yourself in contention here, the offense has to pick it up. There's no other bones about it. I mean, they have to do that, and it can't just be Adley Rutschman or just hoping Gunnar Henderson. It's got to be some of these guys who've been around. They need Hayes to pick it up. They need Mountcastle to, over the last 4 or 5 days where he swung the bat better, they need that to continue. He can't go back to how he's been over the last 2 months. So they need that. They need Cedric Mullins to keep hitting. They need all hands on deck, right? I mean, if you're going to do this thing, you need especially some of those guys who've been around a couple years, those guys that at this point you'd say they've graduated. They're not that young anymore. They've been around for 3-4 years now, some of these guys. So it's time to roll because the days are getting shorter, right? I mean, so We'll
since
see
I'm
how
the
it
old
plays
guy
out.
here and mentioned 40 man, and I guess I can even mention old things like hit and run and stealing bases and things like that. I do have an update on the Ottawa. Do you remember the Ottawa team's nickname? Because it took me a minute. Because I'm like, I know they were the Expos. What did they? They were the
Wasn't it
Ottawa
I was
Lynx.
gonna say it was the Lynx.
Ottawa Lynx.
LYNX, right?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
stopped playing in 2007. They've been
Yeah.
gone 15 years. There's like some Frontier Pioneer League thing going on there, but nonetheless, the Orioles had 4 years. It only felt like a
It was
decade.
only 4. Wow. Okay. All right.
Oh
I
02
would
to
have.
oh 06. In oh 06, they signed with Norfolk, and they've been there ever
Okay.
since. And in oh 06, the club was sold to Allentown, Pennsylvania. Your people up there, the Fetterman people.
Yeah.
So they are in Allentown now. So and they've been there since 2006. So that's Ottawa, beautiful stadium, but no place to put an affiliate, from what I could tell.
Yeah. That's funny. I would have guessed it was like 7 or 8 years. So I get you said 02 through 06. That's interesting.
You know what's wild
Yeah.
though, dude? As I get older, 53 now. It used to be I would travel anywhere. I would travel in my 20s or 30s. I would go through Durham, North Carolina, and I'd have to go see like the ballpark. I mean, usually the ballparks, you'd see it. If you drove through Richmond, you would see the Diamond. I remember when that was a brand new facility, driving through there back in the late 80s, early 90s. So you go through these minor league towns and you'd see these. I've seen the Norfolk Stadium when I went to Nags Head a couple years ago. Hey, that's where Gary Kendall manages. Look at that. I was like checking all that out. But Ottawa, I just it didn't even strike me anything about baseball until I pulled by and I'm like, oh, they got a oh, that's right. We were here. It took me a minute to figure that out. And I'm like, oh, what a god awful place to be. I hope Norfolk is better, and I hope the travel in is better for anybody they're calling up. Luke will be getting called up all week long, doing double duty now that I've been thrown out of the Ravens. He is available at Baltimore Luke and Luke at WNST.net. I am a very available individual. I'll be here all week long, getting ready for Ravens football, watching the Orioles try to claw themselves back into this wild card thing. Certainly the next couple of days, they could really play themselves out of this thing if they don't play themselves into it. Crucial games coming up here this week for the Birds, and Luke will be monitoring all of that stuff. I am Nasty at WNST.net. You can find me anytime, day or night, at BaltimorePositive.com. Also ramping up our football coverage around here this week. I am going to have plenty on my mind about press credentials and Chad Steele. You can read all about that out at BaltimorePositive.com. I am Nestor. He is Luke. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We'll be talking more baseball later in the week. Stick around. We're BaltimorePositive.com.